If you've been following my channel, you may know that Ki-Adi-Mundi is one of my most recurring characters to voice, both in my own projects and in those of other channels. While I have grown to like him, this seems to have become a rather unpopular opinion, as a large portion of the Star Wars fandom now views the character with great disdain. Of course, everyone is entitled to their opinion, but I think the reasons people give for disliking him are very unfair and misinformed. As far as I can tell, the source most people cite for the dislike of Ki-Adi-Mundi is, surprisingly, not an official source, but a video by a YouTuber named Geetsleys that has over 2 million views as of this recording. I want to clarify that this is in no way meant to be an attack on Geetsleys as a person, but I'm also not going to sugarcoat that his video was really terrible, and I'm going to explain why. The video has been parroted several times by several other channels, and even translated into other languages. If you believe the content of this video and are spreading it, I ask you this: have you actually checked to see if it's true? Well, not to worry, because I'm here to check it out for you! While I'll be addressing his points, which are, shall we say, loosely based on the expanded universe, my fellow YouTuber, I Am Your Alibi, will be joining me on this quest.
Thanks for having me. As someone who has extensively covered the 2008 Clone Wars series, I'm here to address those of Geetsleys' arguments that are based on said series. So, shall we get into it?
Among Star Wars fans, Ki-Adi-Mundi is largely known for his sizable head, his role as the leader of the Galactic Marines, and his concern about the droid attack on the Wookiees. But there was more to his character than being a meme. As a matter of fact, Ki-Adi-Mundi was actually a pretty terrible guy, the embodiment of all the flaws of the Jedi, and above all, an utterly heartless man.
We're at the intro and have already reached our first contradiction. You just said that he's best known for showing concern about the droid attack on the Wookiees. You'd think that an utterly heartless man would be indifferent to the Wookiees being attacked. The video doesn't get any more cohesive from here, so let it be known, we're in for a ride.
In this video, we're going to look into why all my homies hate Ki-Adi-Mundi, and why he damn well deserved to get shot in the back.
Genocide is justified if it happens to bad people! But for real, are you seriously going to make the argument that Order 66 was the right thing to do? Did you even put him on a trial or anything? You know what? The trial of Ki-Adi-Mundi starts here and now. Geetsleys is the prosecutor, Alibi and I are the lawyers, and you, my dear viewers, will be the jury. My interpretation of Mundi's character will be based on the following sources. If you want to learn more about his character, I suggest you read these stories for yourself. Now, some of you might be saying that these stories are all from the Expanded Universe continuity, which was declared non-canon in 2014. However, as Geetsleys does bring up events from Expanded Universe material, it's completely justified to use the Expanded Universe to debunk his claims. And just in case you didn't think the Expanded Universe was ever canon to begin with, then A, yes it was, and B, you shouldn't think much of Geetsleys' videos to begin with, since, like I said, he refers to events from the Expanded Universe continuity. Mundi can't be indifferent to his families if he doesn't even have a family in canon. I would also like to clarify once and for all that, regardless of whether it's canon or not, Mundi simply was not portrayed as a sociopath in the Expanded Universe. Dragon Ball GT isn't canon, but that doesn't mean I can just make something up that never happened in the show and claim it's part of the plot. Instead, Ki-Adi-Mundi was consistently portrayed as a compassionate and caring man who did not enjoy violence. But since most Star Wars fans haven't really read many Mundi-centric stories themselves, they may not know any better when they see someone just making up a story about this character being a terrible person. The guy you thought was good is actually bad seems to be a popular type of video. Mario is evil, Goku is a terrible father, Greg Heffley's a psychopath. And since Mundi isn't a fan favorite who would cause massive outrage and hatred if he was slandered, but is still well known enough that people recognize him, he seems like a perfect candidate for this type of video. But maybe I'm being a little unfair to Geetsleys here. Maybe he really believes what he's saying and isn't just doing it for the money.
This video is brought to you by Surfshark.
Okay, you get my point. And we're skipping the ad.
In the past, we made videos about Bakara and the Marines and questioned whether they would be a good fit for Mundi, repeatedly concluding that Mundi and Bakara had two fundamentally different tactical outlooks. But while there were many ways in which Mundi and Bakara differed, being a piece of trash wasn't one of them.
I admit that I'm not very familiar with Commander Bakara's character, but if I learned anything from Geetsley's video on Ki-Adi-Mundi, it's that I should take any of the bold claims he just made about Bakara with a huge grain of salt.
First things first, let's take a look at Ki-Adi-Mundi's highly limited role in the movies. He generally only appears in Jedi Council scenes, but there's a pattern to those appearances. He's always screwing things up.
He suggested sending Obi-Wan Kenobi to go after General Grievous. That turned out to be a good idea.
In The Phantom Menace, when Qui-Gon first reports his battle with Darth Maul, Mundi was the first to deny that the return of the Sith was a possibility.
Which was a perfectly reasonable reaction for him to have. Anyone would be doubtful if they heard the news that someone had been attacked by a member of an organization thought to be extinct for thousands of years.
In Attack of the Clones, Mundi denied it was possible for Dooku to have been behind assassination attempts on Padme Amidala because he used to be a Jedi and was thus incapable of such things.
Except that he didn't say that. Windu did.
You know, milady, Count Dooku was once a Jedi. He couldn't assassinate anyone. It's not in his character.
And yes, you can argue that Geetsley's point ultimately still stands, since Mundi describes Dooku in much the same light, saying he's a political idealist and not a murderer.
He is a political idealist, not a murderer.
But it's pretty hard to take Geetsley's argument seriously when he can't be bothered to get details like this right, even when they're coming from a source as mainstream as the Star Wars films.
In Star Wars The Clone Wars, he convinced the Council to ignore Duchess Satine's request for Republic aid.
That is a complete misrepresentation. Mundi explains that without the Separatists' involvement, the Jedi/Republic have no reason to get involved, which makes it an internal affair for the Mandalorians.
Without involvement from the Separatists, this is an internal affair for the Mandalorians. I'm afraid we cannot help.
He's not trying to convince anyone, he's simply stating facts. And as a note, the Jedi used this exact same logic when it came to Onderon. Because it was a neutral planet that ultimately welcomed the Separatist presence, the Jedi and Republic could not get directly involved, which is why they chose to quietly support the rebel movement instead and stay mostly hands-off. They're being consistent and entirely fair. Furthermore, given Yoda agrees with Mundi, why is Geetsley not calling him a sociopath?
I'm afraid her decision to keep Mandalore neutral makes this situation difficult.
Understand your feelings, I do, Obi-Wan. But to take action, support from the Republic Senate, we will need.
As Auditect already mentioned, it certainly seems like Geetsley is choosing to steer clear of fan favorites and go after lesser-known characters instead to avoid backlash, which is incredibly disingenuous. And lastly, Mundi's exact words in this moment are, "I'm afraid we cannot help." So it obviously pains him to admit that their hands are tied. This is a far, far cry from sociopathic behavior.
It should also be noted that, according to Obi-Wan, making the Republic military invade Mandalore's internal affairs would have been highly illegal.
If Republic forces aid you in your assault, it will break treaties that are 100 years old.
Was the first to accuse Ahsoka Tano.
Again, no. In the opening scene of Season 5, Episode 19, To Catch a Jedi, Mundi simply asks Anakin if there was no way he could stop Ahsoka from escaping.
Skywalker, was there no way to stop your Padawan before she escaped?
He sounds calm, if a little concerned over the whole situation. And then Yoda says,
The Council believes that Ahsoka may be guilty of the crime. Still believe they are wrong, do you?
So again, why is Geetsley not accusing the entire council of being sociopathic instead of just Mundi? And then in the opening scene of Season 5, Episode 20, The Wrong Jedi, all Mundi says is that there's evidence that Ahsoka is behind the temple bombing.
And yet there's evidence that she is indeed the mastermind behind the attack on the temple.
And And once more, I'll ask you to pay close attention to his wording and tone of voice. He's not making angry accusations, he's calmly stating facts. He's behaving no differently than any Jedi should. And during Ahsoka's trial, he does the same, calmly stating that there is evidence contrary to the idea that Ahsoka holds the Jedi values sacred, and asking her to explain her final encounter with Letta.
The values of the Jedi are sacred to me.
There is evidence to the contrary. You were alone with Letta Termund when she died. Can you explain this?
He's being completely fair and not the least bit sociopathic.
I would like to add to this discussion that just one sentence ago, Geetsley's claimed that Mundi believed the Jedi was incapable of committing such actions, which means he has just debunked his own claim for us.
In Attack of the Clones, Mundi denied it was possible for Dooku to have been behind assassination attempts on Padme Amidala because he used to be a Jedi and was thus incapable of such things. In Star Wars The Clone Wars, he convinced the Council to ignore Duchess Satine's request for Republic aid, was the first to accuse Ahsoka Tano, and nearly prevented Yoda from learning about Force ghosts.
I find it incredibly irritating how Geetsley fails to elaborate on his points, but I'll take my best guess as to what he's referring to here. In Season 6, Episode 11, Voices, Yoda is put under guard after some shenanigans surrounding his claims that he heard Qui-Gon speak to him from the afterlife. But again, it's not Mundi who makes this decision, it's Windu.
Until what's going on is clear, I want temple guards placed in the medical bay.
All Mundi does throughout this episode is suggest that Yoda may be under attack by the Sith.
Rest, I must.
We have to consider that this may be a deception by the Sith. If the Sith Lord wanted to attack the Jedi Order from within, Master Yoda would be the perfect choice. I fear we are more vulnerable than we think. I fear Yoda is under attack by the Sith, though how remains unknown to us.
Anyway, those are all of Geetsley's ill-researched claims for Mundi in the Clone Wars. Let's see if he fares any better with his arguments regarding legends.
Lastly, in Revenge of the Sith, his insistence that the Council focus on Kashyyyk led to Yoda going away from Coruscant at an incredibly crucial moment, thus dooming the Jedi Order.
Despite how much it's mean, Mundi only brought up Kashyyyk once, so I don't see much of an insistence here. Besides, Yoda volunteered to go there.
What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?
It is critical we send an attack group there immediately.
He's right. It's a system we cannot afford to lose.
Go, I will. Good relations with the Wookiees I have.
Is anyone seriously going to blame him for the fall of the Jedi because he mentioned a planet that Yoda wanted to go to, and Yoda's sole presence is for some reason the Jedi Order's only chance to survive? You know who the real villains in this scenario are? No, it's obviously Ki-Adi-Mundi's parents for giving birth to the guy who ended up mentioning the planet that Yoda wanted to go to, so he wasn't there when Palpatine seized power, thus dooming the Jedi Order. On a more serious note, Geetsley has just contradicted himself again. He antagonized Ki-Adi-Mundi earlier in this video for not wanting to send aid to another planet.
Without involvement from the Separatists, this is an internal affair for the Mandalorians. I'm afraid we cannot help.
Now he antagonizes him because he does want to send aid to another planet.
What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?
What does he even want him to do at this point?
But why was Ki-Adi-Mundi so catastrophically wrong so often?
Because the Republic and the Jedi Council were both being manipulated by the Sith. That's kind of a major plot point and a recurring theme in the story, and he's far from the only character who was deceived.
And what does this have to do with him being a terrible person?
Geetsley seems to use the term sociopath and terrible person interchangeably, which is a little problematic. Now, I won't claim that I am an expert on antisocial personality disorder either, but I'm pretty sure that being mistaken about things isn't actually a symptom.
Both him being terrible, as we'll get into in a moment, and him always being wrong were the result of the same flaw. He was the embodiment of the failures of the Jedi Council. Like Vrook Lamar before him, Mundi embraced the detached, dogmatic, and incredibly judgmental perversion of the light side that the Jedi Order often strayed toward, and it reflected both in his actions and his worldview.
Then why would he be such good friends with the Dark Woman? You know, the Jedi Master known for being extremely unorthodox and questionable. I find it rather odd that she is not brought up anywhere in this video aside from one brief indirect mention, despite how important her relationship with Ki-Adi-Mundi is to his character. He is clearly established to be less judgmental of her than other Jedi are. When he sensed the dark side in his Padawan Asherad Het, Mundi didn't react in a judgmental way either. He let Asherad talk about his feelings and said he would respect whatever choice the Padawan would make.
The worst effect of this mindset, and the reason why we think Mundi was so terrible, is how detached it made him. Now, emotional detachment was a large part of being a Jedi. One needed to put emotion aside to focus on the will of the Force. That isn't the same as being totally emotionless, however. As Anakin Skywalker said in Attack of the Clones, emotions like love and compassion were actually encouraged as the Jedi recognized the importance of emotion in life. What the Jedi warned their students to avoid were strong emotions like passion, anger, and jealousy, and they also considered it important to consider any and all emotions secondary to the will of the Force. But Ki-Adi-Mundi apparently didn't get this nuance because he was a total sociopath. Ki-Adi-Mundi either didn't allow himself to feel any emotion at all, or he denied that he felt emotion, neither of which was a good thing.
Well, if you're talking about the movies, the reason he doesn't show all that much emotion is because he's both a side character with only a few lines of dialogue per film, and under very heavy makeup. Yes, he looks relatively human, but the actor was changed up a lot. Check out these behind the scenes pictures, it's really amazing. If you're talking about the expanded universe stories where he has a bigger role that would warrant him to show more emotion, well, he does. He shows just as much emotion as you would expect from any character. I genuinely don't know what Geatsleys is referring to here, and if he doesn't give a source, and if checking Mundi's appearances contradicts his claims, I have no choice but to assume he just made it up.
When his whole family was murdered during the Clone Wars, he passed it off with a shrug.
We're going to talk more about the Mundi family later. However, checking the source, Mundi describes his reaction to their deaths as finding it difficult to accept. Have you ever noticed that barely any of the pictures Geatsley puts on screen are actually reflecting the events he's talking about? It's almost as if doing so would completely disprove his arguments.
When Anakin was mourning the supposed death of his master, Mundi's advice was that he just move on.
No, it was to accept the fact that he is dead, and acting irrationally isn't going to change that. Of course, Obi-Wan wasn't actually dead and Mundi turned out to be mistaken, but Anakin's refusal to let go of lost ones is a recurring character flaw throughout the prequel trilogy, and is in fact the main reason he ends up turning into Darth Vader in the first place. Yeah, how dare Mundi not endorse massacring children as a coping mechanism? You may also remember Yoda later giving Anakin the exact same advice in Revenge of the Sith, so Geatsleys is playing favorites again.
Not to mention, Anakin receives very similar advice from Luminara in Season 2, Episode 6 of the Clone Wars.
I knew they were still alive. I told you we shouldn't give up on them.
It's not that I gave up, Skywalker, but unlike you, when the time comes, I am prepared to let my student go. Can you say the same?
So again, why does Geatsley insist on pointing the finger at nobody but Mundi?
And when his friends and comrades died of terrible wounds they had received in battle, he passed it off as just will of the Force.
It's not clear what exactly he's referring to here, so I'm going to look for a few examples of Mundi reacting to allies being killed. Firstly, in the comic Prelude to Rebellion, a spy working for Mundi named Yid was killed after he was seen passing on information to the Jedi. Mundi was shown to blame himself, apologizing to the late Yid with the words, "You were right, Yid. I should have been more cautious. Eyes were watching. I'm sorry. This is my fault." The narration also provides the following passage. He is aware of the darkness that envelops him, of the chill in the air, that from somewhere far away, an unfamiliar voice is calling his name. Interpret this as you will, but I doubt the writers were trying to convey the message that he doesn't care. Another example is in Chapter 22 of Star Wars Clone Wars, where he is shown to be visibly worried about Aayla Secura and Shaak Ti due to the wounds that they have sustained in their battle against General Grievous, and is saddened to hear that they are the only survivors. In the hunt for Aurra Sing, he immediately rushes to the aid of both the Dark Woman and then Adigalia when they get injured, even expressing clear worry that the Dark Woman might be dead. In To the Vanishing Point, we also see him being visibly saddened by the sacrifice of Rivanu in that comic, and in Outlander, he is shown to take offense to the victims of Sharad Head's raids, but later on in the story, he is still shown to be saddened by Sharad being killed. Okay, well, what about the clones? Was he like General Krell and just viewed them as expendable cannon fodder? Let us take a look at this excerpt from the novel Republic Commando Hard Contact, which is written from Mundi's point of view. There is something very touching about them. They look like soldiers, they fight like soldiers, and sometimes they even talk like soldiers. They have all the finest qualities of the fighting man, but behind that is nothing. No love, no family, no happy memory that comes from having truly lived. When I see one of these men killed, I weep more for him than for any ordinary soldier who has lived a full and normal life. I should add that I haven't actually read this novel, and for all I know this quote could be fake, but you know what, just let me have this one. I've obviously done far more research and provided more evidence than Geetsley's has so far. And if that doesn't convince you, did you know that someone wrote an entire story about how Mundi handled his friends and comrades dying in battle? Let me introduce you to Star Wars Clone Wars Adventures, To the Vanishing Point, where Ki explains that he meditates about all the lives lost in the war. Next, Geetsley explains some of Mundi's backstory. I'm not going to comment on that because he actually gets most of it right for once, though, if I may nitpick.
The Mundis gave up Ki-Adi to the Jedi Order when the Wandering Knight stopped on Syria.
The Dark Woman was not just some random wandering knight, but the planet's official watchman specifically tasked to watch the planet.
As a Padawan, he was apprenticed to Grand Master Yoda and was the last ever Jedi to receive that honor.
So far, Geetsley's points have suggested he isn't familiar with the expanded universe, the Clone Wars, or the prequel trilogy. But this claim makes me question if he's even watched the original trilogy.
He quickly became known for his skill and he rose swiftly to the rank of Jedi Knight and then Master.
While it's possible he quickly became a knight, he didn't become a master until he was at least 60 years old, as he is actually still a knight during the Phantom Menace.
As his family had hoped, he did indeed return to purge Syria of its raiders,
which is evidence that he cared about his family. If you read Vow of Justice, this was a personal mission that he chose to go to because he wanted to protect his family. The Council didn't send him to do it.
Unlike the virgin Anakin Skywalker, who had only one wife and cared about her deeply, the Chad Ki-Adi-Mundi had 5 wives and 7 daughters between them, and he didn't care about a single one of them.
Firstly, Geetsley didn't even get the number of children right. He has 7 at the beginning of the story, and one of his wives gets pregnant again at the end, boosting the total to at least 8. Secondly, the story outright states that he loves his family. I don't know what else you want me to tell you. He later spends the entire story trying to rescue his daughter Sylvan from Jabba the Hutt, and has a tearful reunion with her at the end. Later on in the sequel story Outlander, he is angered at the mere mention of Jabba and starts insulting and threatening him for daring to put his daughter in danger. The character that Geetsley is trying to portray Ki-Adi-Mundi as probably wouldn't have cared and reacted normally to Jabba. There's even this very sweet page of Mundi going on this big family picnic at the end of Prelude to Rebellion. Also, is he seriously trying to paint Anakin as a better husband than Ki-Adi-Mundi? I suppose in the world of Geetsley's, loving your family, going to the other end of the galaxy in order to rescue your daughter, and threatening the person who hurt her means you don't care. Yelling at your wife while you strangle her means you care deeply.
Per the Jedi Code, Mundi wasn't allowed to form emotional attachments to any of his wives or daughters. However, he ended up going much further than that, as he appeared to not have cared about them at all.
To my knowledge, the only time we hear Mundi talk about his feelings about his family in relation to the Jedi Code is in the comic Star Wars Republic on Hostile Ground. Of course, it completely contradicts everything what Geetsley just told you, and Ki-Adi says that he tried not to grow too attached to his family, but it was always difficult. I'm showing you the page he's presumably referring to because, despite claiming Mundi's atrocities are so numerous, Geetsley doesn't seem to think it's important to ever show any visual evidence of any of them, and keeps blending in completely irrelevant picture of Ki-Adi-Mundi not doing anything questionable. Even if you went into Geetsley's video with a completely open mind, doesn't it seem a bit odd that he never shows an example or proof of whatever he's talking about? Next up, Geetsley describes the Battle of Syria, and I'm skipping up to the point where it becomes relevant to Ki-Adi-Mundi.
Many Syrians died in the Battle of Syria, and among those murdered were Ki-Adi-Mundi's entire family. Now, most people would be pretty despondent at just losing one member of their family, never mind 12. Even Jedi mourn the deaths of those who were dear to them, but Ki-Adi-Mundi? Nah. He just didn't care.
I've already disproven this. I can't help but notice that Geetsley keeps making the same claims all over again. Maybe he should try something new I don't know, show evidence?
In fact, the reason we know about his family dying in this battle is because he told the story to Anakin Skywalker after the Battle of Jabiim.
I'm skipping over Geetsley's description of the Battle of Jabiim. But if you want to know the story, check out my friend Shapeshifter's fantastic dub of that comic. Link in the description.
And do you know what his point in telling was? It was that Anakin shouldn't mourn the deaths of so many of his friends because he had just lost his entire family, and since he wasn't bothered by it, Anakin shouldn't be bothered by his losses either.
No, he brought it up because Anakin believed that Obi-Wan, who is presumed dead in battle, may still be alive because they never found a body, and Ki-Adi-Mundi said there might not have been a body to recover like with his family. Geetsley also never brings this up in this video, but Ki-Adi-Mundi only thought that his family had been completely exterminated. The book Jedi vs. Sith, The Essential Guide to the Force, confirms that he still had living descendants in the time of the New Jedi Order, meaning that some, if not all, survived the Battle of Syria without Ki-Adi knowing. This doesn't really change his perspective on what happened, since we don't know if he ever found out, but I still wanted to include that info since many people, including Wikipedia, do just take his word that his entire family was killed. Everything else that Geetsley says is just repetition of earlier claims, all given without evidence of course, and so I think we can move on to my closing thoughts. I think Geetsley's video was full of false information, poorly chosen visuals that mostly didn't relate to his claims, and was very clearly made out of a bias and a desire to get views, rather than to accurately inform people. Geetsley has every right to dislike Ki-Adi-Mundi, but he doesn't have to make up lies about the character to justify his dislike, and especially not frame his headcanons as if they were official stories. I think that Geetsley's fans have a right to expect better made and more honest videos from a big YouTuber like him. Do you have any closing thoughts, Alibi?
Your characterization of Geetsley's video really hits the nail on the head, and honestly, it seems over the past several years there's been this widespread obsession with just hating on the Jedi in general, which deeply confuses me. Yes, the Jedi are far from perfect, but it sends up huge red flags when you're going around claiming that any or all of them deserved genocide. And it's infuriating to watch people twist the facts so that they can bash good characters while giving the ones who actually deserve that criticism a free pass. All because most big channels like Geetsley's are paralyzed by fear of losing viewers over criticizing fan favorites. Well, unlike Geetsley, I prefer fair criticism over pandering. So if you want to rip into a Jedi for being a genuinely terrible person, Ahsoka Tano from the Clone Wars is the perfect candidate.
Now there's a take you don't hear every day. The reputation of Ahsoka Tano may be willing to die, but I am not the one who is going to kill it. If you would like to know why Ahsoka may actually live up to the critiques the fandom likes to apply to Jedi like Ki-Adi-Mundi, a link to Alibi's channel, as well as her Ahsoka critical playlist can be found in the description below. But for now, we hope that you leave this video with a better informed opinion on Ki-Adi-Mundi. This is Auditect signing off.